Welcome, everyone, to Fruits of the Orchard. Tonight, we were going to be learning two Torah portions. In a year that is not a leap year, there are a number of portions that are doubled up in order to do the whole cycle of the year. So tonight, we're going to be learning the Parsha of Tazria and Metzorah. And I'm going to combine the Torahs that are written in Fruits of the Orchard and taking a little bit from all of them. Sometimes we just concentrate on one or two of the articles, but especially for those who have the book, you'll see that I'm taking a little bit from everything and I'm combining the two portions because they go together, because they're both discussing in large part one thing, and that is the disease called Tzara'at. Tzara'at is commonly translated as leprosy, and yet the sages make a big push that everyone should understand that it is not leprosy. It is a spiritual disease, meaning that it's a skin disease, and it may look like leprosy, but it comes from spiritual reasons, not physiological reasons. And this is really the only disease that is discussed in the Torah. And therefore, the fact that there are two whole portions dealing with this one disease, which we're told no longer exists, it was manifest at a certain time period, and we don't have this disease anymore. So then the obvious question is, what are we to learn from this if we're already told that we don't have this anymore? So just like everything in the Torah, we're told there are many things that we don't do anymore or observe, especially everything connected with the temple, the service in the temple, with the Sanhedrin, all of these things that we no longer have, and the many, many mitzvot that are connected to the temple and the Sanhedrin no longer apply. But the general principle is everything in the Torah is eternal, and all of the mitzvot, all of the stories are eternal and have everlasting relevance to us in every generation and every person. So what can we learn from this disease called Tzara'at, a skin disease? So the first thing is the point that the sages make is that it came from spiritual reasons. And it's discussed in the Talmud different reasons that a person would get Tzara'at. And it's actually quite a long list of different sins or misdeeds or lack of consciousness that would lead to someone getting Tzara'at. But the one that, in a sense, caught everyone's attention is speaking evil about other people, called Lashon Hara, evil speech. And as we continue, we'll see why this one reason stands out among all the other reasons. So the sages point out that this disease was non-communicable. And yet, when you look at the laws connected to this disease, part of it is that when someone is diagnosed with having this disease, part of it is he is sent outside of the camp and is in isolation for 7 days. And then he's checked again by the Kohen. And we'll understand why it's the Kohen, the priest, who is in charge of declaring and checking if it truly is this disease and when it's over. And sometimes he's sent out for another 2 weeks of isolation. And then there's a whole healing process that is described in the portion of Metzorah, the second of our two portions. So it's explained, though, if you read it on a superficial level, it appears that the Torah is telling us good sense. If there's a communicable disease, then we want to isolate the person. Now, obviously, over the last few years with the whole COVID situation, where people, whole cities were in isolation, whole countries were in isolation for days at a time, weeks at a time, months at a time. So there is something striking about what the Torah is talking about. And there's obviously good sense that if someone has COVID, that they should be isolated, they should stay home. But Tzara'at, the disease we're talking about, was not a communicable disease. And some of the ways we see it is in the following laws. If a bride and a groom who are just about to get married or just got married, but they're in the midst of the 7 days of celebrations after the marriage, and let's say there's signs on their skin that perhaps they have Tzara'at. So the law is you don't have to bring them to a Kohen. A Kohen doesn't have to go see. And they wait till after the 7 days of celebration. And then they go to the Kohen. So the obvious comment or question is, well, if it's communicable disease and it's thought that they have it, and there are many, many people at their wedding, so this is like a super spreader. And so since this disease was not considered that, a Kohen, a groom and a bride, a chatan and kala, who have the signs of maybe having Tzara'at, they're not declared having Tzara'at until after the 7 days. So that's one thing. Another thing is that if someone has white blotches on their skin, then it's a sign of Tzara'at. But if someone's whole body turns white, so you would think like they're the most important person to isolate. Yet the Torah says if someone's skin turns all white, they are not considered impure and they don't have to be separated. And the third idea is we're told that Tzara'at can appear on the person's body, on their clothes, or in the walls of their house. And we're told that it actually, when the Torah gives over the laws of Tzara'at, it's in that order. First, if it's on the skin, if it's on clothes, and if it's in the house. But then we're told that the way it would appear is, first it would appear in a person's house as like a warning that you're off track here. You're leading towards a disaster in the making. Like take notice, change your ways. And if that message didn't get through, it would appear on a person's clothing. And if a person still doesn't change their ways, then it would appear on their skin. So if Tzara'at appears in the walls of a house, so this is like a discoloring. We would like it would be like moldy looking, some kind of a discoloring in the stones of the houses. The houses were made of stone then. So the law is that a person has to take all of their possessions out of the house, and then they do a fixing on all of the walls. So you would think if this is a communicable disease, the last thing you would want is to take all the things that a person has touched and been in contact with out of the house in the public area where people could be in contact with it. So all these three reasons that I just brought is showing us that it wasn't that kind of spreadable disease. A person would get it for spiritual reasons and had to be dealt with in a spiritual way. That's why the person is brought to the Kohen. And we'll discuss that a little bit more in a few minutes. So we'll go back to the question. So what do we have to learn from this? So it's especially true today. It's been true through all of history, but especially today, that so many of what we call modern ailments, modern diseases that people suffer from, are coming from different lifestyle choices and different levels of stress and different ways that we eat. And so many of the ailments of today are coming from sometimes a lifetime of misuse of our bodies, lack of exercise, smoking, drinking alcohol, taking drugs, taking medications that maybe aren't needed, eating lots of fast foods, not healthy, all of these, and high stress levels. So it is true that certain sicknesses that we have are genetic, or at least a propensity towards different kinds of sickness are coming from genetics. It's true that certain people from a young age are suffering from different maladies, but so many of modern ailments are coming from poor lifestyle choices, and especially when you combine smoking and drinking and drugs and fast foods and high level stress all together. So it's going to come out in heart disease, in different cancers, in ulcers, in migraines, in back pain, in neck pain, all these different things that are at least partially, if not in great measure, caused by these kind of lifestyle choices that we make. So here we see that the Torah is telling us something very, very important about we'll call it the spiritual nature. So when I talk about lifestyle choices, that's in conjunction with a spiritual outlook that we have about our lives and how we're treating our bodies, and the disconnect between body and soul. So the Torah is teaching us something very important. And it was stated thousands of years ago that so much of disease is coming from spiritual misuses of our energy and our simple understanding of the body and the soul. Now we know that until, I'm just guessing, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the whole idea of alternative medicine was very, very frowned upon by conventional doctors. But there's no doubt in the last 30 or 40 years that alternative medicine has certainly come to the forefront. And much of alternative medicine is based on the idea that we don't just treat the symptoms, but we need to get to the root causes of illness. So much of conventional medicine until 40 years ago was treating the symptom and not looking at the whole person, not looking at their emotional state, their psychological state, their spiritual state. just looking at the symptoms that they're showing and trying to treat it mostly with medication. So alternative medicine, I'm just lumping all of it together, is based more on a premise that you have to take a whole person's being into consideration when you're looking for the root causes of illness. And that's really what the Torah is saying here, that this particular disease, which is just a specific of a general understanding of health, that we have to look at a person's spiritual state, their outlook, their attitude about life. So this is very, very important. So let's look now at the root word in Hebrew for sickness or disease or malady. And that is the two-letter gate of the words that are connected here is chet lamed. And you'll have the words that represent illness connected. Machala means a disease. If someone is sick, he's called a choleh. That when someone is sick, they are weak. The word for weak in Hebrew is chalash. And the corpse of a body is called a halal. They're all based on chet lamed. Disease, someone who is sick, someone who is weak, and someone who dies. All based on the same two-letter gate or root, chet lamed. Machala, choleh, chalash, and halal. But Rabbi Ginsburg teaches that the same two-letter root, chet lamed, also means the opposite. Chayil. Chayil means strong. Every Friday night, we sing the song Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor, a strong, morally foundational kind of person, a woman of valor. And in modern Hebrew, a soldier is called a chayal, all based on strength. So Rabbi Ginsburg teaches, well, how do we understand that the same root can mean two opposites? So in relationship to sickness and illness, he makes just a simple point, but it's very, very profound, is that when we understand sickness as a wake-up call, as a warning, the body is telling us there's something very wrong here. There's something out of balance. And so if we take these warning signs, then we can make changes in our life, and ultimately we can come out of it stronger. So this is a very, very important idea. Now, obviously, we're talking in general terms. There are certain diseases that people do not recover from. Chas v'shalom. And we have certain genetic diseases that are beyond what our spiritual state is. And certain people are born with certain challenges. That's the correct term now, is challenged. So these are things that are out of our hands in a certain way, but our attitude towards them is not out of our hands. But here we're just talking about different ailments that come and go. Some take long-term treatment, some are a common cold, a virus, a flu, an infection, a headache, a backache, and these can be treated. But if we take any of these more immediate types of illnesses that we are subject to, and we learn the lesson from them, and we look in a spiritual way. Why is my resistance so low? Why do I keep on catching colds? Why am I prone to this, that, or the other thing? And then if we search, we might see in our different lifestyle choices that we're just not exercising properly. We might be overweight. We might be just eating the wrong foods at the wrong time, the wrong amounts, that our lives are too stressed. And all these ideas, smoking, drinking, drugs, all these things, that if the illness might be the warning sign that ultimately will make us change our way and be stronger from it. So that's a very deep insight into the same two-letter root can mean sickness, or it could lead us to be stronger and adopt a different way of treating our body and the body-soul connection. And when I was talking before about alternative medicine, so I didn't emphasize enough this idea of the what we now call the body-soul connection as far as health goes. As I said before, it used to be that conventional medicine was just aiming at the symptoms, where the more we understand about how the soul affects the body, the soul here we mean our attitudes. If a person is seriously depressed, it's going to affect their health. It's not just a mental state of being. It's going to very negatively affect someone's health. And the same thing with levels of stress. It's not just a work-related phenomenon. It's going to affect every part of the body. Every single part of the body is going to react to stress. Everyone is different, and everyone will react differently to stress. But it inevitably will come out. So now that we've looked at a two-letter root, let's look at the root for the word Tzara'at. So the root for Tzara'at is Tzadi Resh Ayin. That word alone means tzara, which means suffering, pain, real challenges, trials and tribulations. Tzara, Tzadi Resh Ayin. So let's just permute these letters, and especially the two-letter gate. Remember, every three-letter root will have a two-letter gate. Now, there's the two more prominent letters for that root. So the two-letter is Tzadi Resh. So now let's look at all three letters and then just two of them. So the two-letter one is Tzadi Resh, Tsar. Tsar means narrow, means constricted. And so this applies to Tzara'at because when a person is diagnosed with Tzara'at, they have to leave the camp. And so they are in like mentally, they're like, they're confined to quarters, you could say that. They're in isolation. And actually, one of the three letters permutations of Tzadi Resh Ayin is Ayin Tzadi Resh, which means otzer, which means to stop up, to prevent. So a person who's put into isolation is prevented from coming in contact. But we're told the reason is not because for this particular disease that people will catch it from him. It's for the person to have time to put their life together, to really figure out what brought this upon me. What did I do wrong? And then if they understand what they did wrong, why did I do it? And do total what's called cheshbon and nefesh, and a spiritual accounting, and to do tshuva. That was the purpose of the isolation. And of course, during COVID, when many of us had to experience isolation, either because at one point we got COVID, or because of government's decrees about things that were closed and where you could go, where you couldn't go. And so in a sense, we all experienced this. And many people report that it gave them a time to really think about not just why is this happening in the world, but, well, why am I experiencing this? Why am I alive while this is happening? How do I relate to this? So 2 of the letters of the root Tzadi Resh Ayin, the last 2 are Resh Ayin, which is Ra, evil. And I already mentioned that one of practically the most important reason associated with getting this disease is evil speech, Lashon Hara, from the same letters, Resh Ayin. But now, if you take the letters Ra, evil, and you just switch them around, it spells air, Ayin Resh, which means to wake up. And here, as we've said, when we were analyzing the 2-letter root of Chet Lamed, the idea that by having a certain sickness or disease, it could lead us eventually, ultimately, to be much stronger, Chayil, to be strong. So the same thing here, someone who went through Sara'at, it's a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call. Another 2 of the letters, Ayin Sadi, if you add a hey at the end, it's Eitzah, means advice. So here we see that the Torah is giving us really good advice. And as I mentioned, in a certain way, it's only very much in the last 30, 40 years has really a revolution occurred within the medical arena, where even conventional doctors now understand that you can't just treat symptoms. You have to look at the whole person in order to get to the root of what's happening here. And so the Torah is giving us a good eitzah, a good advice, with this idea of the one disease that it's talking about is a disease that has spiritual reasons for it. And then the last one is Resh Sadi. And if you add a hey to it, it's Rotzeh, I want. So again, when any of us are experiencing ill health, and it's a wake-up call, so the hope is that a person won't just treat it with its symptoms, just take a bunch of pills and then just go on, let's say, with poor lifestyle choices. That a person that being sick, which is, no one wants to be sick, but if we can turn it around, remember in Purim, the 2 most important words were nahafochu, to turn everything around. So here we're turning the letters of Tzara, and we're turning it into a wake-up call, into good advice, and to awaken our will. Rotzeh, I want to change so that I won't have to experience this again. Okay, now let's go back to the idea of why is it the Kohen who determines if a person has Sara'at, who then has the authority to send a person outside of the camp, who has the authority to then decide when they are healed, and then is in charge of the healing process that we will discuss in short also that it's discussed in the Parsha of Metzorah. All of Tzara'at is about this disease. And then Metzorah is mostly about how a person is healed. And this whole very symbolic ritual that accompanies the purification process from this disease of Tzara'at. So first of all, it just makes perfect sense, because since the reasons for this disease is coming from spiritual sources, and the Kohen, he is the spiritual representative of God in a sense. The whole tribe of the Kohanim and the Leviim, their mission in the world is to teach Torah and to be a spiritual foundation for Israel, especially at the time of the temple or the Mishkan. The Torah is talking about when we had a tabernacle, a Mishkan. So that makes a lot of sense that it's the Kohen who is in charge. But here, again, we can learn something very, very appropriate to our modern age, and especially in physics, where we know that right now the cutting edge of physics is coming to understand the role of the observer in not only observing reality, but actually affecting reality. And through hundreds, if not thousands of experiments, they have found that when whether it's looking at atoms or molecules or energy and the different forces of the universe, that when they are observed, the very fact of their being observed affects the outcome of the experiments. Now, this is not necessarily a given that we would think that, but they have established this many, many times, that the very fact that a certain reality, certain phenomenon are being observed is going to affect that reality. So here we see something that we've learned many times, and that comes from the Sefer Yetzirah, when it describes the different dimensions of reality. And it talks about what's called Olam, Shana, and Nefesh. Olam means world. Shana means year. Nefesh means soul or consciousness. So world means space. Olam means space. Shana, year, means time. And Nefesh means consciousness. So we know that there are 3 dimensions to space. And until Einstein, time was not conceived of as a dimension, and it wasn't conceived of as intrinsically connected to space. They were thought of as 2 different entities altogether. Now we know that time and space are woven together, intrinsically connected. And what's happening in science now is a awakening to the role of consciousness in, again, not just observing reality, but the effect of observation on creating reality. And this is where consciousness comes in. So therefore, anyone can Google the role of consciousness in modern physics today, and you'll see scores of websites that talk about this new area. Now, Sefer Yetzirah is thousands of years old and already understood that consciousness is also, as it were, a dimension. It is intrinsically connected to time and space. It's not something a part of, and time and space are not apart from consciousness. So all of this is really alluded to with this idea of the Kohen only through observation and declaring someone to have Sarat do they fall into the category of having Sarat. Like we brought the example before, if a bride and groom have all the indications, all of the symptoms of having this disease, but they're in the midst of their 7 days of joy, well, if the Kohen does not declare them to have this disease, then they don't, in a sense, they don't fall into that category. The declaration establishes the reality. Now, this is such an important point because, as I mentioned before, certain diseases are genetically influenced, if not in a small manner, sometimes in a total manner. And certain things we can't change about our propensity to disease. But it's not black and white. We can somewhat change, but our attitude can always change. That's why two people could be diagnosed with the same sickness at the same time, and one will become totally depressed, will give up hope, their attitude is, I'm never going to get better. What's the point? And another person is like, I'm gonna fight this. Now, it's not guaranteed that one will live longer than the other, but they have done many research projects, and they found definitively that a person's attitude will absolutely make a difference, totally make a difference. How much and everything, that's according to the person and many factors. But the idea here is that just like an observer affects reality, and in fact, the language that is used in science, not by, let's say, laymen, but in science, is that, for example, the classic example is an electron, where at one point, at least the way I learned it in school, the electron, proton, and neutron were entities. They were things. They were physical things. Now they say that they're wave functions. They're in the cloud, and that within an atom, an electron can be here, there, or everywhere at the same time, which sounds not very logical, but quantum physics has proven this. But when the electron is observed, and the words of science is, it forces the electron to take a position. Just the fact that it's being observed, which is, it's really quite mysterious. It's very mysterious. I mean, all of quantum physics is mysterious and even mystical. But like I said, they've done enough lab experiments that these things are true and accepted. So just like the observer will force an electron to take a position, our attitude about life in great measure determines how our life plays itself out. Now, it's clear that we can't control everything that happens to us. That's super clear. And we can't control things that are happening beyond our purview. But once they're affecting us, the way we react to them in great measure will decide how the reality plays itself out. And this is a famous saying from the Baal Shem Tov: think good and it will be good. Now, it could be that what's happening doesn't appear to be so good. But then we have the idea, let's say, of Nahum of Gamzu, who said, Gam zu l'tova, also this is for the good. Also this here is something that appears not so good. But he would always say, Gam ze l'tova, this is also for the good. Now, if a person looks at it, it might be they're still experiencing pain or discomfort. But if their attitude is a good attitude, then that pain and suffering and everything that goes along with it won't necessarily color the way they're experiencing life. It will affect it, but it's a big difference between something affecting you and determining how you see what's happening around you. So these are very, very important ideas, and they're all alluded to in the role of the Kohen and the disease of Tzara'at. So now I just want to mention a little bit about the reason that we've given of evil speech. So the question is, where do we learn that from? So one of the sources, because in the Gemara, as I said, there's a whole list of things that we might do wrong that in the old days would bring upon this spiritual malady upon us. And the one, as I said, that the sages chose to emphasize is evil speech. So we already saw in the word Tzara'at is the word Ra, evil. And they say that evil speech is called Motzei Ra. He brings evil out of his mouth. Motzei Ra. But in the Torah itself, where do we see a source or a support for this idea? And it's in Parshat Bahalotcha, in the book of Numbers. And this is when Miriam and Aaron seemingly speak negatively about their brother Moshe. The truth is they didn't mean evil. They didn't mean something bad to happen, but they questioned Moshe's actions and his motives in separating from his wife physically. And they said to God, we're also prophets, and we haven't separated from our wives or husband. Like, why is Moshe acting like this? So it's not the classical example where someone says something like really evil about someone in order to hurt them or ruin their reputation or destroy them. Nonetheless, they were talking negatively about Moshe. And so in the Torah, God explains to them the difference between Moshe and all the other prophets. It's one of the main sections in the Torah that tell us about the whole nature of prophecy and how Moshe was unique among the prophets. And then right after, it says that Miriam got Tzara'at. And so the sages just put like one and one together is, well, here we have a perfect example of someone speaking very negatively, and right after they get Tzara'at. So there's a number of things that we could learn from this, is that, first of all, right afterwards, it says that Miriam was sent out of the camp for 7 days. And the Torah says that Am Yisrael, they didn't move until she came back into the camp. And so the sages learned from this the idea of Mida Keneged Mida. This is one of the examples of Mida Keneged Mida, a measure for a measure. Why did all of Am Yisrael wait for her? So they say is because when Moshe was put into a little basket, when they couldn't hide him anymore, and they were afraid that he would be taken by the Egyptians and killed, and he was put in a little basket on the Nile. So it said that Miriam kind of followed the basket to see what would happen, to make, do her best to protect him. So they said because Miriam waited to see what would happen to Moshe, all of Israel waited for Miriam to come back into the camp. So that's just one of the ideas that's learned from this story. But another thing is right after she gets Tzara'at, so Aaron goes to Moshe. Now remember, they just spoke against Moshe, and Moshe knew that. And Aaron said, please pray for her. And so Moshe prays for her. He doesn't say, well, why should I pray for her? She just spoke Lashon Hara. No, Moshe immediately prays, and he says 5 words. Kel na rafa na la. Please, God, heal her. In other words, this is brought as sometimes we need to pray at great length. And other times we have to just get that prayer in just with all of our strength and just a flash. And if you remember, when all of Israel came to the Reed Sea and the Egyptians are following them and the people are crying out, and so Moshe is praying. What else would Moshe do? And God says, enough, tell the people to move. And so Rashi explains that God is saying there's a time for a long prayer, and there's a time that you just have to act. You have to move. So obviously Moshe learned the lesson, because here he's seeing his sister, who of course he loved, and she loved him. But now she has Tzara'at from this whole incident. And so he says there's 5 words. Kel na rafa na la. Please, God, heal her. And these words were incorporated into the Yedid Nefesh song or poem that many, if not most, congregations sing right before Kabbalat Shabbat on Friday night. It's this very lofty love song of longing of the Jewish people and the Jewish soul to be connected to its beloved God. And so these words is my soul is lovesick. Please heal my lovesick soul for you. Kel na rafa na la. And not only is it just short in the amount of words, but the words themselves are almost all just 2 letters, except one. Kel is 2 letters, na is 2 letters, rafa is 3 letters, na is 2 letters, la is 2 letters. In other words, there was no time for long prayers here. Moshe put his whole being and put it as succinctly as he could. But now I want to bring one other connection here, is connection with Moshe praying for her. And one of the reasons why it might have hit him very, very strongly, and that is if you go back to the incident of the burning bush. So at the burning bush, so according to Rashi, that whole dialogue, it's one of the longest dialogues in the entire Torah, and in fact, the whole Tanakh, back and forth between God and Moshe, back and forth. But Rashi tells us it actually was taking place over 7 days. That's what was recorded, but there was a whole dialogue going on for 7 days. And at one point, and Moshe is trying to not accept upon himself the role or the mission or the burden of being the leader. And he has every reason or excuse or idea why he's not the right person. But at one point, he says, he asks God, well, who should I tell them sent me? So God gives him a name. And at one point he says, they're not going to believe me. They're not going to believe me. And God says to him, put your hand in by your heart. And Moshe did. And when he took out his hand, it had Sara'at. So what do we learn from this? Why did he get Sara'at? And then also, he was told to throw down his staff, and it turned into a snake. And the snake represents, of course, evil, and especially evil speech. And so God was showing Moshe, why are you talking about the people like that? How do you know they won't listen? Why are you saying they won't listen? Why are you saying something evil about them? So Moshe understood the connection between evil speech and Sarat, because it happened to him. It happened to him, not just Miriam. But then we can ask the question, why was Moshe so reluctant to take upon the role of being the leader? And why did he say, like, they're not going to listen to me? Meaning they're not on the level that if I come as the leader, they're not on the level right now to be saved. So God considered that really evil speech, lashon hara. But to try to understand is, if we go back, Moshe is the prince of Egypt. He's virtually all powerful. At a certain point, he becomes aware of his Jewish identity. And it says he went out to check on his brothers. And he saw an Egyptian taskmaster beating a Jew. He was going to beat him to death. And Moshe saves him, and he kills the Egyptian. And he buries him in the sand. The next day, he goes out again, trying to see how he could help his brothers. And he sees that the person he just saved is fighting with his brother-in-law. And Moshe tries to break them up and, separate them. And the one that he saved says to him, are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian? And the next thing the Torah says, and the noda hadavar, and this thing became known. Well, how did it become known? Well, somehow that's the nature of evil speech. Once it's in the world, it goes around. So here he was like threatening Moshe, you're going to kill me the way you killed the Egyptian? And the next thing we know, everyone knows about it. And it says, and Pharaoh wanted to kill Moshe, and Moshe had to flee. And he fled. He ends up in Midian. There are many, many midrashim what happened to him on the way. But he was gone for, it depends on the midrash, but around 40 years. So in other words, because this person spoke lashon hara about him, he ended up losing everything. So now God comes and says, go and be their leader. So I just have to go back to a Rashi when it says, and this thing became known. The Noda Hadavar became known. So Rashi says that it's not just a simple translation or interpretation, but it's the way Moshe was thinking. And Rashi says, Moshe says, now I understand, now it's known to me why the Jewish people are in the position they are. How could it be I just saved this person and I killed someone and I put my whole life in jeopardy, and he goes and says Lashon Hara and caused me to have to flee? So this is, Moshe had 40 years to think about this. And here he is at the burning bush. And so some of that comes out. Some of it comes out, but when God hears it, he says, put your hand by your heart and then pull it out. And it had tzaraat. And throw down your staff, and it became a snake. So these were signs to Moshe that you have to get over this. We can understand how you feel about this, but it's time to get over this. You're the person to be the leader. I'm choosing you, and you need to take this upon yourself. Obviously, Moshe did get over it. He became perhaps the greatest leader in all of Jewish history, and in a certain way, symbolically, of all of history, leading a whole people from slavery to freedom, becomes a symbol of greatness and leadership. So this was our double portion of Tzaraat and Metzorah. And one thing I didn't mention is that in the purification ritual, there's just another allusion to evil speech as being the reason, is that the person would take two birds, very, very symbolic, and along with cedar wood and hyssop and a red string. So one of the birds would be slaughtered, and the other bird would be set free. So this represents the kind of like the exile and redemption of this individual person with Surat. That the cedar tree is the tallest tree, and it's because this person was haughty, and the ezov, the hyssop, it grows very close to the ground, and so that represents the type of humbleness that would be needed to cure the overblown ego that led to a person to think that he could just speak evil about anyone without any consequences. And the red string, red is representing sin. And so one bird is slaughtered and the other bird is set free. And of course, this represents the feeling of liberation from this whole ordeal that they just went through, including being outside the camp and in isolation and everything like that. So Rashi says, why two birds? Why are they included in this whole ritual? So he just says, because birds chirp like endlessly. And it represents people who just talk and talk and talk, like kind of foam at the mouth, are always chatting about other people, always looking to get into other people's business. So that's what Rashi said. That's the symbolism of taking these two birds. So to put this all together, let's end with a blessing that going back to this idea, think good and it will be good. So it's the same thing as much as possible about other people. Everyone has their positive points. Everyone has their negative points. God knows, we all know ourselves good enough that we know our positive points and our lackings. But when you think good, when you look on other people good, then it will be good. And then we won't be tempted to speak evil about other people if we're emphasizing their good points. So I bless us all to be very careful with our mouths, to understand that our attitude about life and whatever situation we might find ourselves in, especially about our health, makes a big, big difference. And we should all have good health, and we should all think good, and it will be good.